Hilchis Kilayim Perik Shishi. The Rambam is going to talk about the dinim of being Zereya, Yerek, or Tvua in a Kerem. Now, in this, there's three ifanim. You could be Zereya, the Yerek, in the Kerem. You could be Zereya, the Yerek, outside the Kerem. And then you could be Zereya, the Yerek, not next to a Kerem, but rather next to a Geffen Yechidi. And there's different dinim in each one of these three ifanim. Halacha Aleph. Hazireya Yerek Yitvua Bikerem. You Zireya the Yerek and the Tvua in the Kerem. Oya Mekaime Achehesiv Masayim. You weren't Zireya it, but you saw it fell there, and you were Mekayim at Achehesiv Masayim. Is Hareza Mekadish Men Akfanim Shev Svivesav Sheisha Siyamul Choroch. So there's a din Rabbanon, that Midrabanon, a radius of 16 amas in all directions. You make a circle around this Yerek, and that circle has a radius of 16 amas, which means a diameter of 32 amas, and that entire circle becomes as if it's filled with yerek, and all the kfanim in that circle become maser. Hareza mekadish min akfanim shesvivesav sheisha siyamul l'chol ruach agules v'lei merubois. You make a circle, you don't square it off. V'rein kol eagle, which shirach bei shtayim u'shleishim amma. This eagle, which the radius is 16 amas, which means the diameter is 32 amas. You look at this entire circle, ki'ilu kulei moli yerek, as if it's filled with yerek, even though you only had one yerek in there. But nevertheless, you look at it as if it's moli yerek. V'chol gefen shetia b'teich eagle zeh, any vine that's going to be in this circle is niskachem hayerek, became niskachem hayerek. It became also aser together with the yerek. And v'chol shechutz eagle einon niskaches. And anything that outside the eagle is einon miskachis. So be kitzer. So if a person plants a yerek in a kerem, and that yerek becomes usher because he planted the yerek in the kerem, and there was hashrasha, or a yerek fell and it was mesif masayim after he was interested in it. So mele again. So it comes out that yerek became usher. So not only the yerek becomes usher, but also the vine becomes usher. The geffen becomes usher. How many kfanim become usher? Within a 32, a 16 amber radius, around and around. You make a circle around this yerek, a 16 amber radius, and everything, all the kfanim in the kerem becomes usher because of this yerek, which became usher in the kerem. Halacha beis. B'medvar mamurim. When do we say that it's only a 16 amber radius? You don't go beyond the 16 amas. B'shahoya ben sifsi ho'igol hazeh. If between the circle, the parameter of the circle, the outside of the circle, and the next row, there's more than 4 amas, so then it only extends till 16 amas, and it doesn't extend further. And even if you'll have a singular vine in that area, it won't become usher, because it extended only for 16 amas. Epoch is between the next row and the circle. There's either exactly 4 amas or less than 4 amas. So then this is also a din d'Rabbanan. Then you extend the circle for another 4 amas, and then then we look at it as if the diameter is 40 amas, not 32 amas, because we add 4 amas to each side. The cheshbon of these 4 amas is Avedis HaKerem. Because when you work with a Kerem, so you extend 4 amas, you need 4 amas outside the Kerem for Avedis HaKerem. But you always have Avedis HaKerem. Over here, this Psadin D'Rabbanan, that if the Shura, they would make the Kfanim in a Shura. If that Shura is exactly, there's only 4 amas in between the next Shura, so that Shura is also included in the Yisr. Masha'inkin, if the Shura is not within 4 amas, in other words, there's more than 4 amas in between the outside of the circle and the shura, so then the circle only extends for 16 amas, the radius, and memele, even if you'll have a singular geffen over there, that geffen is not going to become asa. That's the din. It's all the din rabban. Ki'ilu reicha ve'igol arboi mama. V'rein kol geffen shetipul b'teich igol zeh. Of that shura, shel arboi mama is arei miskadesh. So there's 2 nachmo. So the din is if you plant a yerek in a kerem, so the minimum is that there's a 16 amma radius around that kerem. Everything that's within that 16 amma radius becomes usr. All the kfanim become usher. That's number one. And if outside of that 16 amma radius, there's another shuras akfanim, which that shuras akfanim is either exactly 4 amas away or less than 4 amas away, so that shura also is included, not the whole shura, only that part of the shura, which is included in that circle. Halacha Gimel. Bamedvar mamurim b'zireya imekayim techakerem. This din that we learned, that you make a radius of 16 amas or 20 amas, is only if you planted inside the kerem. Now, when you plant outside the kerem, so the din is that we're going to learn later in Perek Zayin, that when you plant outside a kerem, you have to be marchik from the kerem 4 amas. If you are marchik 4 amas, if there's 4 amas in between the kerem and the zera that you're planting outside the kerem, that's fine. But if you planted a zera within 4 amas of the kerem, so the mela, that zera is answering the kerem. It answers the kerem, and not only it answers the first row, which it's within less than 4 amas, but it even extends to the second row. Even though the second row from the zera is further than 4 amas, because it could be 8 amas or 10 amas, but nevertheless the din is that the two rows that are next to the zera become usher. How long do they become, how much do they become usher? So it depends. In other words, if you have, let's say, a kerem, which is 100 amas long, and you planted the zera outside the kerem. So if you planted just one seed, so memela, it extends 4 amas in the length of the kerem in both directions, and for 2 rows of the kerem. If you, let's say you planted the zera for, let's say, 10 amas out of the 100 amas, so again, it extends, obviously, those 10 amas. The 2 shuras of the kerem become usher, keneged those place where the zera is, plus 4 amas in the length in both directions. That's what he's saying. Bamedvar mamurim bizireya imekayim techa kerem. Avala zireya chutz lekerem. V'samuchle means within 4 amas. Is areze mekadesh shtei shuri shel tfanim hasmuches lezera. So then now it's mekadesh, it's answering the 2 rows of the kfanim, which is close to the zera. Be'era kol zera. Firstly, it's the length, those 2 rows, the length of the entire zera that was planted outside of the kerem be'isr, and also v'yeser arba amas chutz lezera, and it also extends in the length 4 amas chutz lezera in both directions. That's as far as what becomes usher of the kerem. Miskadish min hazera, how much of the zera becomes usher? Reichiv arba amas be'era kol hashur shel kerem. So a reichiv arba amas means 4 amas of the zera, but it really only means the 4 amas of the zera, which is next to the kerem. In other words, let's say if you planted zera, you started, let's say, 2 amas away from the kerem, and you planted, and there's some of the zera is more than 4 amas away from the zera, so that zera is not going to become usher. The only zera that's going to become usher is the zera which is within 4 amas of the kerem. That's what he's saying. Miskadish min hazera reichav arba amas be'ira kol hashura shel kerem. Wherever the zera is along this shura shel kerem. So in other words, you extend outside of the kerem 4 amas, and anything which is in those 4 amas of the kerem of zera becomes usher as far as the zera is concerned. That's talking about if you planted next to a kerem. However, v'imzora b'tzad gefen yechidus, you didn't plant next to a kerem, but rather you planted next to a vine. So then, eine mekadesh min hazera ela shisha tvachim chol ruach. Over there, the archak is not 4 amas, but over there it's shisha tvachim, which is 1 amma, and shisha tvachim l'chol ruach. So in other words, a 1 amma radius around that gefen, any zera that would be planted in a 1 amma radius of the gefen would be usher. So we have 3 dinim. We have planting a zera in a kerem, we have a planting a zera next to a kerem, and we have planting a zera next to a gefen yechidus. Halacha dalad yalda pachas mitefach eina mikadeshes es azroim. There's an argument to get what's exactly the pshat. Are we talking about only when it's a kerem? And as we learned, that there's a din of a kerem and there's a din of a gefen yechidi. From a gefen yechidi, you have to be marchik 6 tvachim. From a kerem, you have to be marchik 4 amas. Now he's saying a yalda pachas mitefach eina mikadeshes es azroim. So does that mean it's not mikadeshes azroim al din kerem, or it's not mikadeshes azroim even al din gefen yechidus? There's an argument about it. Al kol pun lashon haRambam is yalda pachas mitefach eina mikadeshes es azroim. Most, I think, pastors, they learn that we're talking about als din kerem, but als din geffen yichidus, it would be mekadosh. B'med dvarim amurim b'shtayim kineged shtayim v'achas yetze zonav. So in other words, when we're talking about such a kerem, which is called a small kerem, which is shtayim kineged shtayim v'achas yetze zonav, in other words, a proper kerem is 3 vines and 3 vines, 2 rows of 3 vines that are opposite each other. That's a proper kerem. A kerem cotton is called that there's 2 rows, each one has 2, and then there's a third, then there's a 5th geffen which is coming out as a zonav. In other words, it's coming out behind the 2, in the middle of the 2, behind them. Not in the middle. In other words, you're not going to have 4, and in the middle you're going to have the 5th. You have one that's coming out as a tail. That's called a kerem cotton. So he's saying, so if we're dealing with a yalda, a small kerem, so then it's not mekadesh azroim. Again, als din kerem. But if it's a proper kerem, no, it's not a shtayim kineged shtayim b'achas yetze zonov. It's a proper kerem, and they're made out of yaldes. So then it's a reza mekadesh. It's not so clear, Loshna Rambam, but I'll call upon him. It's clear that if lepel you have a proper kerem and they're made out of yaldes, so it is mekadesh. Halacha hey, shtei ganes zu al gav zu. You have 2 gardens, one on top of the other, which means you have a garden on the bottom, and then you have next to it a hill, and on top of the hill you have another garden. Now hatachteina asuya kerem. If the bottom garden was made into a vineyard, it's a kerem. So then as you could plant the hill. You could only plant the hill with yerek until you reach within 10 tvachim of the bottom garden. Karav lekerem. Why? Because she'aver asor tvachim samach lekerem legefen yichidus also lezeh bizroim. Although really the distance of where it's being yonik is quite far. There's 10 tvachim away, but nevertheless, since it's the aver of the kerem. So the aver of the kerem extends until 10 tvachim in the height. So therefore, you can't plant anything on the side of the hill, which is within 10 tvachim of the floor of the bottom, which is the aver of the kerem. That's if the kerem was planted on the bottom, and on the top you want to plant yirakas. Fakert, on top you planted kerem. So now you want to plant the bottom with zera, and you also want to plant the side of the hill with seeds, with zroim, is areza zereas atachtena, atru magia lemata mishleish tvachim miikar akfanim. In other words, the ikar akfanim means where the kfanim begins. In other words, where it starts sticking out of the ground. So as long as you're 3 tvachim away from the ikar akfanim and you're on the side of the hill, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. So in other words, again, if the kfanim are on the bottom, so you could only plant the yerakes until within 10 tvachim of the floor of the kfanim, because the kerem is oil until 10 tvachim in the air. Masha'enkin, if it's fakert, the kfanim are on top, so you're allowed to plant the side of the hill until you're within 3 tvachim of the ikar of the kfanim. Halacha vov. Mi shahoisos sodeu zerua yerek itvua. You planted zeroim atvua, and v'nimlach lita b'kfanim, and now you decided to plant a kfanim there. So hoifech is azroim machresha. So you have to turn it over in order for it not to grow. You plow it. You plow the field, and v'achar kach netei, and then you could go ahead and plant. Abevleita v'achar kach yapech. You shouldn't first plant and then turn over and plow the ground, because we're afraid you might forget to. You might not do it. Now fakert hoisin the tu kfanim. First it was planted with vines, and v'nimlach l'zreya b'zroim, the place where there was a vineyard. Now you want to cut off the vines and plant seeds. So misharish is akfanim, you have to take out the vines with the sharoshim, and v'achar kazreas azroim, and then you go ahead and plant the zroim. V'imrotzo lokis akfanim, actually lishor bem elim pachas mitefach samach laretz. If you want to cut the vines until the vines don't have more, has less than a tefach coming out of the ground, even though be'amas you're not allowed to plant in such a scenario seeds over there. So hareza mutal Israel, you're allowed to plant now seeds. V'achar kach yavzer v'yisharish is hanisher min ha'oretz ba'oretz min ha'kfanim. So in the case where first the seeds were planted, so you shouldn't say, let me first plant the vines and then I'll take out the seeds. You should take out the seeds and then plant the vines. Al derech zeh, if there's vines planted, you shouldn't say, I'm going to plant the seeds, and then I'm going to take out the vines. But if you already cut the vines, so even though you weren't misharish the vines, so then you could go and plant the seeds, and then you'll go ahead and be misharish the vines. Halacha zayin, hamavrich is a gefen boretz. He's extending a vine in the ground. Because you have a vine that's attached to the ground, and now you're taking one end, the end of the vine, you're extending it, and you're burying it in the ground, and eventually it's going to come out somewhere else and grow. And through that, it'll grow better. Hamavrich is a gefen boretz. Is a filo hivricha betecha talas sheyavsha. You took a gourd that was dry and you hollowed it, and now this vine is in this gourd. And venasis kasilein. So the gourd is like a pipe. Oy betechsilin shel cheres. You actually have a pipe made out of cheres, earthenware, and you have this vine going through this pipe. Is imhoya offer al gaba shleishet tvachim yeser. Question is, could I plant seeds on top of the earth, which is above where this vine is going under the ground? So obviously the vine is not like doing anything. If there's a vine there under the ground. So the din is you're not allowed to plant any seeds above this vine, which is going in the ground. That's what he's saying. If there were 3 tvachim in between the top of the ground and the vine, is areza mutal Israel gaba. So then you're allowed to plant on top of the area where the vine is. However, if there was less than 3 tvachim, Osir l'Israel al gaba. But the Isser is only al gaba. Umutal l'Israel b'tzida. You're allowed to plant on the side of the vine. In other words, even though normally you have to be marchik from a vine, it's six tvachim, but over here there's not really a vine that's growing. It's a vine that's just extending under the ground. So above the vine, if the earth is less than 3 tvachim above the vine, you're not allowed to. But on the side of the vine, that's mutter. That's talking about if you did it in a gourd or in a cheres. However, halacha ches ivricha b'sela, if you put it in a rock, you made a hole in a rock, you drilled through a rock and you put the vine through the rock. Is afal pi she'ein offer al gab el sholosh atzbois. There's only gimel atzbois on top of it. Is nevertheless muta lahavi zerachra. Bamedvar mamurim, when could you do this? She'ein ikra gefanira. In other words, you took the vine from its original source, and now you don't really see the original source. It's all buried. Avalim nira, if you could still see where the vine is coming from, the vine is extending from where it's extending from the earth, is tzarich laharchik shisha tvachim l'chol ruach v'achar kach yizra. So now, just like every time when you go, you want to plant near a gefen yechidi, so you have to be marchik 6 tvachim. So even though this gefen is being placed in the earth, but since lepel, this gefen is coming out of the earth, so memela you have to be marchik 6 tvachim from where the gefen is coming out of the earth, unless you can't really notice where the gefen is coming out of the earth, because it was like all buried inside in the extension which you extended this gefen under the earth. Avalim nirat tzarich laharchik shisha tvachim l'chol ruach v'achar kach yizra. K'mei shemarchik mikol gefen yechidus shlei huvrecha k'mei sheyizbor. Hamavrich sholish kvanim v'ikreyim nirim. It's also not so clear what's pshat in this halacha test. You took, and Machlekes arrive at as well. Hamavrich sholish kvanim v'ikreyim nirim. You have 3 vines, and you could still see where the vines came from. So you took those vines, and you buried them you extended them in the earth, but you could still see where they come from. The kreyim is nirim. Is im yesh beinayim me'arba amas at shmeina. So notice, if between these 3 vines there's me'arba amas at shmeina, so therefore they're considered mitzurif. They're considered one hemshech of 3 vines. So then harei elu mitztarfim l'shar kfanim o'indis. Then they're considered part of the other kfanim, which is the kerem. U'ki'ilu le'yavricham. However, v'imlav einam mitztarfis. Now the din is that from a kerem you have to be marchik dal rams. From a gefen yechidus you have to be marchik 6 tvachim. Now you have these 3 kfanim, which were originally part of a kerem. They were originally part of a kerem. But now you took these 3 kfanim and you were hivricham. So you were mavrich them. So the question is, did they become like a new entity? Did they become a new entity? That's the issue over here. So on that, the Ram saying, if beinayim, those beinayim, you could also touch between each other and also between them and the kerem. So in other words, if they, Beinayim, there's, Bichlal, when you have a geffen, which is more than 4 amas, less than 4 amas next to each other, so that's not a really healthy for growth, and therefore they're not really considered 2 kvanim, because eventually one of them will be taken out. It's not a healthy situation. When they're more than 8 amas away from each other, they're not considered together. Together is considered that they are less than 8 amas away from each other and at least 4 amas away from each other. Then they're considered together. Now over here you have a group of 3 kvanim. You have a group of 3 kvanim, and the question is if that group of 3 kvanim is still considered part of the kerem, and therefore you'll have the din of, let's say, if you're zireh zera next to them, it's like you're being zireh next to a kerem. So here the din is that if you're mavrich shleisha kvanim, v'yikreyam nirim, and it's shleisha, so then in yesh b'neim arba amas at shmeina, and therefore they're considered 3 separate kvanim. They're considered an extension of the rest of the kerem, as if you were never mavrik them. However, vimlav, if not, einam mitzdarfes. So you have to understand why dafka 3. Because according to the Raiva, the pshat is that you're being mavrik them, and memela you're making a kerem over here because you had 3, and now you're going to have on the other side another 3, and together they're going to become a kerem. According to the Rambam, we're not talking about under the other side that's sticking out. Over here, the Rambam warns that these kvanim should still be considered part of the original kvanim. So there's a din that they have to be 3, or else if it's only 1, so it's not choshev, and therefore it's considered like separated. Azad din, Der Chamunin says, and also they have to be in a way that they should be mi'arba amas at shmein amas. That's the din. The din is clear that if you have 3 kvanim that were originally part of a kerem, so if you don't do anything, they're definitely part of the kerem. However, you will mavrich them, so then b'chiyai gavna, so then if yesh b'neim arba amas at shmeina, so then they're mitzaref to the kerem, and they have a din as an extension of the kerem. However, you pachas mishalish, ein mitzarfen, and therefore lemarchik mem shishat tvachim l'chol ruach v'ruach. It still needs explanation, this halacha. Halacha Yudalev, Kol Zirei Atachas Hasrigim V'O'alim Hayetzim and Agefen. In other words, you're planting, you're not planting next to the place where the geffen is coming out of the ground. You're planting under the vines, under the branches, or the leaves of the geffen. So it's also Sadin the Rabbanon Hareze Kiddush. Aval Pisha Zera Rochek Mikra Geffen Kamamas. Even though it's actually far from the ikar of the vine, in other words, where the vine is growing from the ground, the zera is nowhere near it, but since it's under where the geffen is, it's just like we learned before, you're not allowed to plant on top of the hill, which is over the aver of the geffen. So al derech zeh, you're not allowed to plant under the geffen, under the place where the vines of the geffen are extending. Hidles ha-geffen al miktas afifyoris, you extend it, they would take the vines and extend it on top of like certain beds made out of lattice, and they would extend the geffen, and the geffen would grow on this afafyoris. Is leyisra tachas mesa afafyoris. Even though there's this lattice, which is made for the geffen to eventually grow over, right now the geffen is not so long, so it didn't extend that far. But nevertheless, you shouldn't plant on the extension of the afafyoris, even though you're not planting under the geffen. Whereas we're talking about the extension of this afafyoris, of this lattice, which has no vines and no leaves. But nevertheless, you shouldn't plant there. However, if you did plant, knows you're not really planting under any vines, is that is a mutter. The same thing would apply. If you took the vine and you extended it over the branch of a tree, which is not a fruit-bearing tree, a tree that doesn't bear fruit. So that tree also becomes like bottled to the vine, and the male has a din like afafyoris, kigeina eres, vaborish, so then also the din is that under the vine, avadi you're not allowed to plant, but even on the rest of the branches of that tree, even though the vine didn't yet extend it, but nevertheless it has a din of afafyoris, and you're not allowed to plant under it. If you plant it under it, it doesn't become usher. But lechatchila, you're not allowed to plant under the extension of that branch. Avalim hidla al mixus ilani meichel. If you extended a vine over a branch, which is a fruit-bearing tree, is areza muter lizreya tachas bad yoilam shenilim shuchalem srige agafen. The part of that tree where the vine didn't extend yet doesn't really have a din of afafioris, doesn't have a din of a bed to that vine. Why? She'ein adam mevatel ilan meichel ve'esa afafioris legefen. So notice he's not really, notice, even though he put it there, and he's talking using this tree, this fruit-bearing tree, for supporting the vine, but he wasn't really mevatel, the fruit-bearing tree to the vine, by the afafioris or by the tree. That's not a fruit-bearing tree. He was mevatel the tree to the vine. And therefore the entire vine is considered bottle to the tree, and you're not allowed to plant onto the entire lattice, the entire tree is bottle to the vine. Therefore, you shouldn't plant onto the rest of the tree as well. Mashenkin, in a fruit-bearing tree, it's not really bottle to the vine. And therefore, the part where the vine is, you're not allowed to plant. But the part of the tree where the vine didn't yet reach, you're allowed to plant. That's what he's saying. However, the nimshuch hasrigin achar shesichachu, achar shezora, v'sichachu al azera. The pale eventually it did extend, and now you planted in a place where you were allowed to plant, but now the vine extended, and now you're not allowed to plant there anymore. Is areza machzir u'mokamacher? So it's not like it didn't become osir. Areza machzir u'mokamacher. You take the vine and you extend it to make sure that the vine shouldn't be hanging over the zera. Halacha Yud Gimel. Hazireya tachas meiser afafyoris. A tachas meiser ilon she'enei seperes. And then the nimshechu srige agefen, the sichachu al azroi. Hareze osur lekaimei achzel hazer asrigim. In the case in Halacha Yud Beis, we're talking about that it was an Elon Michael. And since it was an Elon Michael, so be'etzem you were allowed to plant under the extension of those branches of the Elon Michael where there was no vine. So now, even though that vine now extended over the zera, nevertheless the zera is mutter. And what you do is, you take that vine and you put it back. Mash'enkin, in a case where you were zireya tachas meiser afafyoris, so over there, or tachas meiser of an ilan, which is not an ilan meichel, so over there, really, you weren't allowed to plant there. So even though by planting there, it didn't become usher, but if eventually the vine extended over there, so when the vine eventually extended over there, it became usher. And then the zera is usher. That's what he's saying. Hazireya tachas meiser afafyoris. Etachas meiser ilon she'enei seperes, v'nimshechu srige agefen, v'sichachu al azroim, and they extended over the zroim, is areza also lekaimei elahazer asrigim. You're now allowed to continue keeping those side of vines and side the zera. Elakates esa oiker hazera. You have to be oiker the zera. You have to be oiker the zera. They fixed the gear, so the gear should be areza osir lekaime ula azar asrigim. Locates an esa azera. So taka the srigim don't become osir, even though it eventually extended. But on the other end, in the case before, they had the option of putting back the srigim and continue leaving the zera. Mashenkin, over here you have no option. Over here you have to be oiker the zera. Halacha Yudalet. Kanim hayotzim min ha'oris. You have a lattice, and that lattice was made for the vines to extend over. Now from that lattice is coming out a stick or whatever, and lepel, that stick is not there really for the vine. But on the other end, you don't want to cut it off because it's going to ruin maybe the lattice will get schwacher. But I'll call upon it's not really there for the vine to extend over. Is areza mutal izreya tachteim. You're allowed to plant under it, just like by the fruit-bearing tree. It's not bottled to the rest. It's not considered a bed for the vine. So this piece is also not considered a bed for the vine. It's an extension of the lattice, but it's not really part of the lattice. However, if you left it there in order for the vines to extend over it, so then it's areza asal izreya tachteim. Then you're allowed to plant under it, because then it's considered an extension of this lattice. Halacha tezvov perach hayetze min ha'oris eimen adolos. you have a leaf, something growing out of either a vine that's extended over a lattice, or a vine which without a lattice, and you have a leaf sticking out of it. Is royno sekilu mishkelis tluya be'alaretz. Because you take a plumb line, because you make it a direct line, how much it goes over the earth until the bottom. The asul is after. So kitzer, you're not allowed to plant under it. Anything outside of it is mutter, but under it is asur. The chena meteach is made of me'ilan le'ilan. If you extend, you have a vine and you pull it from one tree to another tree, and that's how it's hanging. Is also the zayatachter. You're not allowed to plant anything under that vine, which is the huda pashat. Now, kosher chevel igemi bizmeida. Because you want to extend a vine and you want to hang it, but the vine is not long enough to hang from one tree to the other tree. So you add a piece of rope or a type of rope, and you add it to the vine, and now you're extending the vine from one tree to the other tree through this rope. Kosher chevel igemi bizmeida. Knows you tied a rope or a gemi, which is a type of rope made out of reeds, grass, and the kosher haresh echad be'ilan, and one you tie to the tree, is areza mutal zriyat chevel. So even though this chevel is holding up the vine, but the chevel is not made for the vine to extend over the chevel. The chevel is only there to help the vine hang. So in the Mela, you're allowed to plant under the vine. You're allowed to plant under the chevel. If the purpose of this rope is for the vines to extend over the rope, so then the vines is like kalaris. So then it has the din of a lattice, and the male of asul is after. You're not allowed to plant under it.